Hola.
Perdón, mira, no se te escucha.
Mira, you're muted. I think you were muted.
Now I'm unmuted. Buenas tardes a todos. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Yo solo quería saludaros. Hoy empezamos, es el primer seminario que hemos organizado de los 7, Fundación FAES y Resilience Future en cooperación. Vamos a los próximos 7 lunes intentar a introducir el debate sobre China en España. Hoy os dejo con Ana Palacio, que va a moderar este evento, que es el triángulo los Estados Unidos, China y la Unión Europea. Y estoy segura que ahora Ana os va a saludar a todos y introducir y presentar nuestros panelistas. Buenas tardes.
Well, and we are switching into English. So welcome especially our audience, but also our panelists. I mean, the title of this seminar, which as Mira Milosevic said, is the first of a series of 7 seminars. And I will say that thanks to the Secretaría de Estado para España Global, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because they have also backed this project that is developed by FAES and by both FAES and the Resilience. So I will try to make the best use. So I'm going to make a very short introduction, but to start with the title, the China-US-EU triangle. I mean, there is a project behind these 7 seminars, and the project is to foster the debate in Spain, the debate on China and China in promoting understanding of the strategic implications for Spain of the current discussion on China with both EU and NATO. And at the outset, I will be stating the obvious, is that with the COVID acting as catalyzer, China's role in global affairs has undergone a massive shift with power. It's emerged or almost emerged, at least in economic terms. As the geopolitical effects of COVID-19 are lingering with the US and Europe under extraordinary pressures, China has managed to reframe the debate. And this is something that is seen and perceived in most capitals in Europe. We saw, for instance, the debate around the chairman, the election of the chairman of the CDU, and how China was part of it. It's part of in Brussels, in the European Union, in Paris, but in Spain there is very little debate yet. And this is what the idea behind this series of seminars. Without further ado, I will go and introduce also very briefly the panelists, because it's them that have to speak today. Ambassador Sendagorta is now the director of the director of. Sorry, because I have lost, which is the worst thing that it can happen to you, the note. So I will just go ahead. I know him enough, but you always have. Ambassador Sendagorta is presently the Director General of Foreign Policy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Spain, but he has a long and illustrious career, and he has written very recently a book power strategies, China, the United States, and Europe in the age of great rivalry, which I really recommend if you haven't read it. This is the cover of it in Spanish. I know that Ambassador Sendagorta has to leave at 18:15, so we will continue for 15 more minutes. Miguel Otero, another great friend, and Miguel is one of the leading voices of the Elcano Royal Institute in Madrid. Miguel has written extensively on China, and I must say that we should congratulate him, as he's part of the talent that has made Elcano the second most best rated think tank in Western Europe, and the 11th globally in foreign policy and international relations by the University of Pennsylvania, the Global Think Tanks Index. Last but not least, again, it's my honor to call him a friend and a must voice in this US-China-EU triangle, Andrew Michta. Andrew Michta is Dean of the College of International Security Studies at George Marshall European Center. Andrew is an intellectual powerhouse, and he's bursting with ideas, and ideas are the scarcest commodities nowadays. We are delighted to have you with us. And I must say that Andrew has told me, and he will state it, that he's speaking on his private capacity, and he's not representing or speaking on behalf of the International and Security Studies at the Marshall European Center. For the audience, if you are in Twitter, these are accounts to follow. Ambassador Sendagorta, Miguel Otero, and Andrew Michta, and of course, as Mira Milosevic and Nico de Pedro as well. So a few housekeeping rules. The first is, this is your seminar, you, the audience. So please send the question and answers through the chat box, and we will have some time. We will have a round of interventions, but we will have some time at the end to take on board your questions. So again, I'm going to just go directly or almost directly to put a question first to Ambassador Sendagorta. And I will use as a starting point the Davos, the virtual Davos last week. And there, I think that the intervention of President Xi was projected a China that is openly assertive, although he wrapped himself on all the symbols of multilateralism, of the rule of law, I would say of the liberal democracy, justice, rule of law, human rights, and all that, which, by the way, had a response by Chancellor Merkel that was interesting. But just to launch this conversation that you know extremely well, and it's the topic of your book, which again, I recommend for the audience, just to bring from the new administration, we have the Xi that has projected the idea of China's, this assertiveness of China, but I think that it is pertinent to remember that Jake Sullivan, the new US National Security Advisor, underscored recently, just not before the European Union, not because they did, but then they were not appointed, they were prospective before the European Union agreed or concluded the investment agreement with China. He has underscored recently the questions of power competition And this idea that you need to be, in order to compete for power, you need to be in a position of strength. And that today, in the perspective of Jake Sullivan, was that strength involves today domestic renewal, which thinking of the United States is true, but thinking about Europe is also true, but also investment in allies and reinvigorating alliances. So my question to you is, in this panorama, and you have reflected on it, what are the potential commonalities and the potential divergences between the Biden administration and the European Union when it comes to China? Ambassador Sanaborta.
Well, thank you, Anna. Thank you very much for your kind comments on my book. And what you mentioned about Jake Sullivan, I think it's significant because he was making these comments in an event with his predecessor, Mr. O'Brien, which I think they wanted to send a message of bipartisanship. And this, of course, it's especially relevant for the policy towards China. We expect that there will be a basic continuity between both administrations on the policy towards China. But of course, the devil is in the details, and we don't know issue by issue where will be the new administration. I anticipate, and at the risk of oversimplifying, that there will be some, as you say, similarities and some differences on a number of issues. I'm going to tackle very briefly a couple of them. The first is ideology, and I expect that the US and Europe will be closer on this matter, because I think Europe considers the Biden administration more consistent on the issue of promoting democracy and human rights, and therefore Europe is, the US may be more blunt maybe in this matter, and Europe a bit more shy. But I think we can expect a basically meeting of minds on this area. On technology, I think things are a bit more complicated. On the European side, I think there is more awareness now than 2 years ago that security is a key matter when we approach the new technologies. We had the debate on 5G, on telecommunications, but I expect other debates on artificial intelligence and other coming technologies. What I expect is that the US will ask Europe to apply more control to Chinese investments in Europe, especially or in strategic sectors. And also, I expect that they will ask for more export control of dual-use technologies, so that Europe will not, let's say, cut the US efforts to deny certain technologies on security grounds to China. So this could be the case, but on the European side, there may be doubts on about decoupling, on to what degree this dynamics will lead us to a complete disconnection between the Chinese economy and the, let's say, Western economy in certain technologies. I don't think Europe is comfortable with that. Although one way or another, I think that is what we're going to see in the next few years. The debate will be to what extent decoupling will take place, and I think Europe will be always on the side of the less, the better. Then Europe also has its own asks on the digital field to the US, mainly on data transfer and taxation, and therefore I foresee a very complex conversation with the US, because all these issues in the US-Europe relationship and China transatlantic relationship will be mixed when we tackle them with the new administration. Thank you, and I will stop there so we will have the chance of coming back to some of these matters later on. Thanks a
Well,
lot.
and I think that this is a fantastic segue for or call on the, for you, Miguel Otero. And this is the economy. I mean, one of the aspects that President Xi expressed in his intervention in Davos was this idea of the dual circuits, the internal circuit and the external circuit, just reinforcing each other, which in the end is the question to you that you have studied, on which you have published a lot, is, okay, what about the economy? I mean, there is an emerging economic hegemony, there is this danger of decoupling, but how does China translate this power in the economy into geopolitical, into the geopolitical, pure geopolitical field? So decoupling, but also these internal plus external circuits. Miguel.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for your nice, kind words, and thanks for the Fundación FAES as well for the invitation. And I completely agree that we need to talk more about China in Spain. So happy to do that at any forum and this one in particular. I would say, if we want to divide it between time, space, and culture, it's certain that the economic projection of China is nothing less than extraordinary. We had two major economic shocks in the last 15 years, the global financial crisis that could be seen as a North Atlantic financial crisis, but it became a global economic crisis, and the pandemic. And in both, China is showing its huge resilience over the past 5-6 years. It contributed 30% to the annual growth of GDP in the world. And so, yes, I think over the past, 30, 40, but I think even more the last 10 years, China has increased its economic strength, muscle all over the world. The Belt and Road Initiative is just one example. We can look at Latin America, we can look at Africa, we can look at the recent treaty with the RCEP, with all the Pacific countries in it, but the United States, which is excluded, of course, and so I think that has shown two things. China is much more confident and therefore more assertive or even aggressive in its political endeavors and in wanting to achieve what it wants to get. And I would say that, if we want to divide it between autonomy and influence, China has more and more autonomy, meaning that the United States cannot change China's policy. And vis-a-vis other countries, I would say that China is not able yet to kind of change regimes, but it's true that almost any country, even European countries, any power right now doesn't want to get in trouble with China. And that's major influence, of course. Second only to the United States, I would say. And that brings me to the different spaces. And you were talking about the dual circulation. I think from China's perspective, still the main concern is the domestic. What happens as well in the west of the country, the divide between the urban and rural areas, then its region, where it sees itself as the natural hegemon and wants to push the United States back or away from that regional sphere. But I think, in regards to the global level, it wants to do as much business as possible with the United States and with Europe, but it's not its main focus. I think the main focus of China is still the South. That's where it is feeling more confident, where it has more businesses, and it's kind of happy to leave the Northern Hemisphere to the Western powers. But I think its really focus is, the South, including, of course, East Asia, South Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Finally, on culture, what I learned from my president, leaving president of Elcano, Emilio Lamo de Espinosa, is that, we can see China as a civilization that pretends to be a state. It doesn't really have allies. China has a very transactional approach to power, to bilateral relations. It doesn't need allies. It doesn't think it needs the allies. And generally, I think it is convinced more so about its socio-economic model. It believes that it can, help other countries to follow that model. And that, of course, brings influence. And, closing the circle here, I think, the focus on, improving the West's performance and the economy in the West, I think it's the best antidote against the attractiveness of the authoritarian model of China. And I think if we get to fix our economies, the Chinese model might be attractive for some in the South, but it will be not attractive in the North. But if we don't fix our economies, we will be less competitive and China's appeal will be stronger, and that is worrisome. And I leave it there.
Well, frankly, thank you, Miguel. This idea that the Chinese regime is appealing, besides some strong men, it's kind of shocking, but you are right. I was thinking while you were speaking about a poll conducted, a survey conducted in Italy, where 49% of the respondents said that they would give up freedoms for a strong man that would rebuild the economy. I mean, so that's kind of counterintuitive, but I think that you are absolutely right to put it on the table. Absolutely clearly. Well, Andrew, to you my question, because you have addressed this question, but how come that we didn't see? It seems like we are waking up to China, that China has come from and suddenly there. But the truth is that we have seen this evolution. People say since Deng. I think Deng Xiaoping is a different story, but absolutely the starting point is the WTO. Just China getting into the WTO, and absolutely clear 2013 with President Xi. I can tell you that I attended the inauguration of the Belt and Road, and I thought, what is coming? But the truth is that, how do you explain, how come that we are waking up to the scope of the challenge that China presents to us today?
Thank you, Anna, for inviting me, and thank you to all who are listening and to the organizers. I'm honored to be speaking to such an illustrious group. Like Anna said initially, I need to state I'm speaking in my private capacity as an analyst and not reflecting the official position or policy of the Marshall Center, the US government, or the Defense Department. So take this as just an analyst addressing these issues. To your question, Anna, I think two factors that have driven the process. One is the kind of fundamental misunderstanding what happened in 1990 and the ideological hubris that attended what we all declared as the end of the Cold War. But in effect, much more than that. It was viewed roundly as an unmitigated triumph of the liberal market approach and the vindication of all the assumptions we brought into our competition with the Soviet Union. So that ideological hubris, the end of history, the unipolar moment, if you remember what was written in the United States at that time, even the talk about the United States having in effect created what some refer to as a hyperpower, I think it was largely delusionary, and it reflected the fact that we refused to understand that while democracy, free markets, liberal internationalism played a role in defeating Soviet communism, it was also because freedom, liberty were identified even by the most committed countries in the East as a pathway to prosperity and a pathway to a better life. The second thing, and I say this with great pain because this is what was happening in my own country, was greed masquerading as an ideology, quite frankly. In political science, a lot of stuff was written then about export-driven modernization that would yield democratization. And therefore, if we opened up our markets, our educational institutions to China, China would, to quote a kind of cliche that has been repeated ad nauseum in American debates, China would become a responsible member of the international community. This flew in the face of everything we knew about how rapidly modernizing nation states behave and the extent to which our own experience in the United States, the kind of rapid modernization of American economy, industrialization in the 19th and early 20th century transformed us in that fashion. It was basically leveraging the labor arbitrage between the Chinese cheap labor and the desire by American companies and then increasingly European companies to produce for domestic and global market, but relying on that labor differential. The net result has been a devastation of the industrial capacity of my country, and I think a very tenuous position in which Europe increasingly finds itself. But the ride was good. We were pulled into secondary theater because of 9/11. We were looking at global war on terror. The Chinese in the process, for the past 4 decades, had unrestricted access to the best American educational institutions, to every level of our society writ large. And worse still, we have taken the jewels in the crown of Western industry, of manufacturing, of research and development, and basically transplanted it to China. I will remember some in this audience who may recall the Cold War. During the Cold War, we had COCOM restrictions within NATO that would not allow for any sort of technology sales to the Soviet Union that could be used for dual purposes. So you could not even export an Intel 386 PC to the Soviets because that could be used for military applications. And if you brought in a Soviet scientist, he was the sad individual sitting somewhere at the desk in the library. Last year before COVID hit, we brought 1 million foreign students into American colleges and universities. 370,000 of those have been Chinese graduate students, mainly in STEM research. So in a nutshell, I would say because of what I call greed masquerading as an ideology, the argument that we've unlocked the kind of mysteries of how history will evolve, we have created conditions that in effect allow the Chinese state to grow at an unprecedented 900% over 3 decades. That's in 1 generation, taking somebody who lived in a hut with a dirt floor and moving into an apartment, driving a car and having running water and all the utilities. We are finally waking up for 2 reasons. 1, China is becoming geostrategically assertive in military terms. What the Europeans are refused to acknowledge is that China is building its military capabilities at an astonishing rate. The Chinese Navy right now, in numerical terms, just the number of vessels is now bigger than the US Navy. That fleet is not as capable as the US fleet, but the Chinese are also trying to assert their geostrategic domination along their periphery, the South China Sea, and the kind of increasingly bold moves against Taiwan and pressure that it is putting on other countries. China is now a power in Europe. You've mentioned Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese are increasing their stake in port facilities. Their FDI has declined somewhat because of the Trump administration's pressure, but the Chinese have been investing increasingly in research and development in Europe. And most of all, just 3 weeks before the new administration came in Washington, the Europeans moved to sign the CAI, right? So in effect, something that was in negotiations for 7 years, all of a sudden, the Chinese, in effect, pulled the trick of agreeing to have the comprehensive agreement on investment. in a nutshell, in my view, the Chinese are trying to separate Europe from the United States, to drive a wedge into the larger transatlantic community. Remember, right now, still 75% of European trade is coming via the Atlantic, and the US Navy controls the sea lanes of communication. So the Chinese are trying to build an alternative supply chain across Eurasia. That's Belt and Road, that's 17+1, defend it, and then push the United States out of the Western Pacific and transform Europe, not into the entry point for the transatlantic community into Eurasia, but in my view, into the tail end of the Chinese supply chain. The problem is that we have no consensus between the Europeans and the Americans on the nature of the Chinese threat. In the US, we look at China as both an economic problem set and a military problem set. And I don't think that's going to change with the change of the administration. The Europeans, although they have recognized China as a strategic competitor, they're looking at China as mainly an economic problem set and an opportunity. Hence, the Europeans are determined not to get themselves anywhere near between the US and China when it comes to great power competition, especially in the military sphere. And finally, you made a very keen observation, Anna. How come that people in Italy or elsewhere, quite frankly, are also increasingly seem to be subscribing to the Chinese ideological model? Ideological competition with China will be a very important element. It's coming online fast. I call it the Chinese are offering a free market to unfree people that is allowing for an oligarchy, in this case, a Marxist oligarchy. The Chinese Communist Party is only 90 million plus, and the Central Committee and really Xi and his entourage are running a country of 1.4 billion people. But in the context of the pandemic, of the turmoil that we've had all across Western democracies, the Chinese are trying to sell that model as an alternative to liberal democracy. And I think what that means is that the Chinese not only want to revise the post-Cold War international order, which is what the Russians are trying to do, but they want to replace that order with the order built around their own power, their own value set, their own culture and civilization. And I'll pause.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I will pick up, your intervention and I'm sure that it will suggest reactions from Ambassador Sendaorta and from Miguel Otero. I myself, there are moments where I hate to be moderating or chairing because I would like to just respond. But allow me to ask Fidel Sendaorta. Andrew has very rightly, because I think that this is one of the issues that is on the table, this idea that China is creating a wedge between in the transatlantic relationship. I think seen from Europe that it's a slightly different. This is the view by Americans, and I highly respect it. But what I see is that Europeans have had a sobering experience with President Trump. And I think there is this idea to sit on the fence, to just to be in the middle, to have this Sinatra my way position. So my question to you is, what are the key issues for Spain? Spain is one of the most active voices in support of this idea of being sitting on the fence, or knowing that we are a lot that unites us with the United States, but having this strategic distancing. But what do you think that is the core of the European perspective? What are our priorities that are not exactly the same, as you very well said, the same as the Americans, but more deeply? What is our position as Europeans, as Spain within Europe? What is our position in this narrative of wedge, or just being cautious? Fidel, you now.
Thank you, Anna. Well, I think we have been working this last couple of years in a new policy towards China, but we have basically done it on our own as Europeans, because the communication was very poor with Washington. Now we have the chance of not only creating this doctrine just among Europeans, but also in a very fruitful dialogue with the United States. So I think we will tend to find areas of more convergence between both sides of the Atlantic, inevitably. But I think we will shy away from getting into a new Cold War disposition, because the Cold, I think it's a bit of intellectual laziness to talk about Cold War. We need a more complex idea which really deals with China as the reality it is, and we don't want to just to have a policy that is completely based on adversarial reasons. We also need to find a positive agenda with China, and to combine it with the competition, as you were saying, in the ideological realm, but also in technology, or in the economy. But how could we explain to our citizens that we're doing away with a market that is, one of the biggest markets of the world, and this will mean that our citizens will be impoverished? I don't think this makes sense. So we have to find a smart balance, but at the same time, it's exactly, I think, what the US will do with this administration. So I don't think this will be really a problem. We need more talk across the Atlantic, and I'm sure this talk will drive us to better framing the China challenges in ways that we can deal with them most of the time together. Thank you, Ana.
Miguel, I mean, this is a burning question for you. I think that Andrew has mentioned greed masquerading as an ideology. It is clear that there has been a moment when we have created these supply chains that all or most went up to China, and we have dismantled. And so it's more in terms of consumers, of the citizens as consumers, than as the prosperity. And I'm using, I think that this you have alluded to that, Andrew has alluded to it. Prosperity is fundamental, and I'm not discovering anything, because this is what inspired peace and prosperity. The Atlantic Charter. These are the two drivers. Peace was there because of prosperity, and this is the post-World War II multilateral effort. But my question to you is, how do you see these supply chains? How do you see on the one hand, this effort that for President Xi has been clearly put on the table of having a self-sufficiency in terms of, meaning China having a self-sufficiency in terms of technology, especially, and at the same time playing in the international arena. What is your perspective? Are there certain areas that have to be withdrawn, or is just a matter of dialogue with them?
Yeah, a couple of things, I think. I think Andrew is right that there's a fundamental difference between the United States and Europe in regards to China, that for a lot of people in the United States, and especially as well in the intelligentsia consensus in Washington, etc., China is an enemy. While for most Europeans, it's not. still not. And that is a very different approach to China. When you are in a kind of race and competition and geopolitical rivalry between two powers, the approach is different, because on the one hand, you start to enter into zero-sum games, and there is this feeling of a zero-sum game, dominant in Washington. So if China grows, if China does well, and if China overtakes us, God forbid, then we are in trouble. And I think in Europe, the view is still that as Fidel was saying, that there are issues where you can have positive sum games. And my take on the dual circulation in China and the geopolitical rivalry is this. I think we need to still believe in interdependence. If we believe in liberal theory of international relations, but that doesn't mean that we should be dependent on value chains and dependent on the Chinese market. So my advice to a lot of companies is get in there, get into the Chinese market. You need to be there. But have your value chains diversified so that you don't rely and you are not too dependent on the Chinese market. I think it's a key, policy advice that we need to push on. And as Fidel said, on technological matters, there will be more and more decoupling. So European companies, they will have to operate with systems that are different in China and in the rest of the world.
Miguel, of course, you say the US sees China as an enemy. Well, we use this expression that I would like you to explain to me, which is systemic rival. Why you say that enemies? Because enemy, in my opinion, has a connotation of, hostilities, open hostilities. I mean, yeah, it's true that we cannot imagine hostilities while the US can imagine hostilities. But frankly, we use these circumventions. We speak about strategic autonomy. We speak about systemic rival, negotiating partner. It's clear. We have the investment agreement. Economic competitor is also clear, but what do we mean by systemic rival that is so different than what the Americans say? That I haven't seen Andrew or anyone saying it's the enemy. Well, we are in a power competition, and of course that's I think that, I mean, for us Europeans, we see we are from Venus, Americans are from Mars, and therefore enemies is for them, and for us is this concept which is fluid of systemic. What is systemic rivalry? That is not.
Well, I think it's for me it's useful to make this differentiation, because I think enemy has a lot of, as you say, a stronger meaning in terms of what you need to do to stop the other. If it is an enemy, you have to stop him. You might even annihilate him or get rid of him. It's an enemy. It's threatening your way of life. Strategic rivalry, I would say, a systemic rivalry is more, look, the socioeconomic political system of China, we don't like. And therefore, that they are either passively or actively promoting it around the world. We are concerned about that, but I think the view is not that China kind of so far, and I think Danny Roderick on the comprehensive agreement on investment made that point, is, does this imply that China is going to change us? And I think that's where we draw the line. And I think it's a very different perception than you might have in Washington, where you have a lot of people really saying, look, we need to, if not regime change, we need to make everything possible that China's economic locomotive does not continue to go forward the way it has been over the past 40 years, which is a very different, take. As I say, it's a more of a zero-sum take then a positive sum game, which is still prevalent and dominant
Well,
in Europe.
I'm not going to speak as an American because I'm not. So Andrew, I mean, I don't, I mean, of course, this is again this debate about Venus and Mars, but frankly, to label Americans as they see China as the enemy, no, they see China as a threat. And I personally think that we in Europe, we see China as a threat in different areas. And of course, I mean, also as a systemic rival, if you want, but as a negotiating partner. But I mean, while you were speaking, Miguel, I was thinking of Australia and the reaction that they got when they dared to ask for an international investigation on the origin of COVID. I mean, frankly, what is this? We don't dare do, but what does this mean? I think that personally, but okay, again, I'm not American. I'm the minority of Europeans. Andrew, for you.
Okay. Well, first, let me just correct a couple of misperceptions here. First of all, Fidel, I have never used the term Cold War. And to bring in the Cold War paradigm into this, it simply doesn't fit. Actually, I would say, may we be so lucky. During the Cold War, the collective West was confronted by one aspirational global power, which was the Soviet Union. And until the Soviets built ocean-going Navy, the blue water-going Navy in the 70s, there was still very much a continental player. China was a regional power, and then, of course, Nixon-Kissinger deal pulling China out of isolation allowed us to leverage China against the Soviet Union. So my point is, right now we're in a different game. We are confronted not by one, but two. And when I say we, I say collective West. Two near-peer military competitors. Russia is not a competitor in economic terms, but militarily relative to the overall disarmament of Europe, its military modernization has gone a long way to tilt the balance of power on the continent. Second thing, Cold War was about containing the Soviet Union. You cannot contain China. I agree with Miguel about this. You have to outcompete the Chinese. And to outcompete the Chinese, you have to level the playing field. Anna mentioned China entering WTO as a developing nation. Whoever agreed to that should have had their head examined. Second point, the Chinese have been effectively centralizing supply chains rather than the expectations being that as Chinese manufacturing and labor costs go up, there'll be a diffusion of supply chains. The globalization will work its way as the theory assumed, and other countries in Asia and elsewhere will pick up the slack. China will move into the higher end of the manufacturing supply chain structure. None of that happened. If you want evidence for how radically the Chinese have centralized the supply chains by engaging in what I call mercantile policies. This is not free trade. We had a congressional research study done about a year and a half ago, very solid data. 1 in 5 Western companies doing business in China have been extorted for intellectual property in exchange for market access. This is not free trade. When we hit the pandemic, we discovered, and so did you, all of our European friends and allies, that you are dependent on China, just like we were, for PPEs, for medications. 80% of all antibiotics that my country utilizes are manufactured in China. So Fidel, I'm not calling for a Cold War. And the last thing I want is a military dimension to this. But there's a saying in Kentucky, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging, okay? What we've been doing for the last 30 years was digging ourselves ever deeper into a hole while we've been taken to the proverbial cleaners by the Chinese Communist Party. And I will emphasize, Communist Party. Not once has the values aspect been mentioned in this conversation. It's a very different thing to engage in free trade with countries that share our values, our principles, and with whom we can negotiate. It's a very different situation when Anna mentioned the Australians. while you're being bullied and threatened and extorted. So the Europeans just signed the investment agreement with the very country that uses slave labor, that continues to repress the Uyghur Muslims, and yet this doesn't even enter into the conversation. And the last point I want to make, we can outcompete the Chinese, but if we continue on the present trajectory with digital manufacturing coming online, with the inherent advantages that Western technological chains used to have, we're going to wake up in about 10 or 15 years in a very different world when it comes to our values, Miguel, that you're saying we will not allow them to change. They've already changed a lot of the ways in which we do business, what we tolerate, and what we find acceptable. And I'll stop here.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
Because
Go
I
ahead.
have to leave.
Yeah, go ahead.
In the middle of this, when the debate is getting really more exciting and more interesting. But just to clarify that I didn't respond to Andrew when I was speaking about the Cold War. I know he didn't mention that expression, and he was not referring to that. But I'm referring to all those who tend to think that we are at a repetition of that that mindset that we had with the Soviet Union. It's a much more complex situation, as Andrew I think just very well explained. Much more, in a way, much more difficult than it was the Cold War was at the time. So with that small clarification, I just thank you all for this wonderful discussion, and I'm just very sorry that I have to leave. Thanks a lot.
But you will come back.
Thank you, Fidel. Very nice to have met you.
Thank you,
Keep in touch.
Fidel. I hope you come back. My question now,
Fidel.
we are just wrapping up. My question is double. Should we, it's the first question that we had, in this transatlantic dialogue extended to this West that you mentioned, Andrew, does it make sense after this conversation? And I will ask you first and then Miguel. Does it make sense to try to have a consensus between Europe and the United States? Is there a grounds for consensus? And is this consensus going to be the common denominator that is it low or high? Because we have said in certain issues we will not agree, in others, yes. What is your expectation? Just reversing. First,
yes, thank you, Anna. I most emphatically will say that we need to reach as close a consensus between our European allies and the democratic allies across the globe. I include in this our allies in Asia, the Troika, the Aussies, the New Zealanders, the Japanese, the South Koreans, because we're facing truly an existential challenge. If you recall the NATO Reflection Group that just finished its report, one of the primary focal points of that discussion was how to bring the American and European security optics closer on a key set of issues when it comes to China. Nobody on the US side is expecting, at least not me, that the Europeans would be pulled in the military dimension of the competition, and certainly not in the Indo-Pacific. But keep one thing in mind, Russia and China are aligned in their opposition to the liberal democratic order. Whether the Russians are smart doing this, that's a separate conversation. But this has been absolutely evident in terms of the recent moves that both the Russians and the Chinese have been making. And if you consider the fact that my country is coming down from 2 decades of warfare, 20 years of incessant military campaigns in secondary theaters, and we're confronting a country that in nominal GDP terms, as Miguel knows, is smaller than the US economy, but in purchasing power parity terms is probably already a few $1 trillion bigger than the US economy. And where we've neglected much of our infrastructure and of our manufacturing base, then we need to cooperate closely, because the United States is now structured to engage in major military operations in only one theater. So if there's pressure in one major theater, if there's pressure in the Indo-Pacific, we will need to attend to this, which means if the Europeans do not properly resource their defense within NATO, preferably, but rebuild their capabilities to ensure deterrence holds in Europe, the opportunistic behavior by the Russians tell me that they will try to push the Europeans, revise the arrangement, and extort them. In other words, we either hang in this together as the collective democratic West. We subscribe to the same set of values. I grant you the last 4 years were pretty turbulent, but I will also submit to you that too easily the kind of personal issues between President Trump and a number of European leaders have almost become an excuse for not looking at these bigger issues. So I want to have a very serious conversation about what unites us, what matters to us, and have a policy, especially on technology transfer, on key oncoming technologies, so that we don't find ourselves yet again in 10 or 15 years where neither the Europeans nor the Americans will be able to compete. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You know, I mean, I wish I were not moderating and I could intervene here. But Miguel, you have the floor, and then I will give the floor to Nico de Pedro for a last minute and to Mira. But Miguel, first to conclude.
I think 3 points really. One is the same that I've been saying about the European Union, European member states vis-a-vis China, where people said China, you know, is in the business of dividing and conquering. It goes the same for the United States-EU relationship. I mean, you know, China will not be able to divide us if we, as Andrew, and I think we agree on that, you know, that we stick together, you know, and let's defend our values. And that brings me to my second point, which is, I think, and Andrew didn't hear, I think we agree as well, which is, look, we will have to compete with China. And to compete with China, we will have to improve our economy, our competitiveness, our, you know, we need to deal with all the issues, inequality, lack of, you know, industrial capacity and strategic capacity and all of these things. We have to deal with that, you know, and if not, you know, China is developing its techno authoritarianism, which is, you know, we had it about the Cold War. Well, you know, this is the, you know, the planning you can do, the central planning you can do now with the capacity you have to accumulate data and compute those data and use those data is formidable. So, you know, this is the biggest challenge we have to confront right now. And for that, we need to prepare our economies and our people. That's for sure. But on the last point is, okay, what China do we want? One where we give it our back, one that we want to isolate, or because my feeling is that if we gang up against China in many areas, China will feel threatened, and the Chinese society and Chinese people will be worse off, right? I mean, do you really think that the situation in Xinjiang will improve if we don't sign an agreement? You know, do you really think that the situation in China will improve if we don't collaborate? And of course, I mean, you know, the Europeans and the European Union have done the most really to bring out the human rights issue, right? That China should sign the international law, labor organization conventions, that China should respect and not have you know, forced labor. I mean, you know, the Europeans are pushing for that on a daily basis, right? But thinking that we treat China some sort of like a pariah state and we do the same then with Iran, that will not help, you know, China, the Chinese people, nor the world.
Well, you know, Ambassador Santagorta said that now we are getting into the flying altitude. I give you the floor, Andrew, but 1 minute.
Just 1 second. Miguel, don't create these extreme kind of dichotomies here, these kinds of binaries. You know, China is, we treat it as a pariah state, we treat it as this. I said we cannot contain China. We need to outcompete the Chinese, but we need to insist that rules apply equitably across the economic and political sphere. And that means, yes, if you kill your own people, if you force them into slave labor, it's not enough to say, we push the Chinese, we've raised that. This should be part of the bargaining chip, and it should be part of a conversation. The Chinese have all of a sudden, just before the new administration came in, relented on a number of positions that for 7 years were supposedly irreducible, could not be negotiated. Do you think this is an economic decision or is it a policy decision? It's drive the wedge between the United States, the incoming administration that wants to have a reset with Europe, and China. So that's all I will say.
No, but
Miguel,
Andrew,
I'm not giving my email address. Let's stay in touch.
so I mean, Andrew, what we need is we need to pursue this conversation, because Miguel's position is a realistic position that has a lot of traction, especially among the Europeans, because the Europeans do not have in their mind that we have been living too comfortably under the security umbrella of the United States. We are less, but as I say, I'm the moderator here, and we are at the end of our time. There is one interesting question that I leave on the table, and the question was along this line of, will we find a consensus? But it was mentioning, will Korea and India, which is very important. We haven't mentioned India here, but this rests on the table. I will ask the organizers, and I'm giving now back the commands to Nico de Pedro, that has finally joined us. But I will ask the organizers to have an 8th church panel with the same interventions just at the end of the seminars, just to wrap up, because I think that this is a fundamental conversation. The only thing is that I don't want to chair, I don't want to moderate, I want to participate, because I couldn't speak. Anyway, it has been a great honor for me to be the moderator, and Nico, you all yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. And yes, I agree. It will be great to have them again to as a wrap up in the end of this series of webinars. So thank you very much, Andrew and Miguel, for a fascinating, and also Fidel, for a fascinating discussion, which really shows that this is a topic that needs to be discussed. And there are serious differences, and we are far away from this, I would think, healthy or necessary consensus on how to approach China between both sides of the Atlantic and within our own political communities. So I was I really would like to thank you both for being here. I think this is an excellent way to start this series of webinars, and really is a perfect frame for what we are trying to do, which is, as has been mentioned, to raise this discussion in Spain and to promote also this dialogue with our colleagues in other parts of Europe and the US. So thank you very much, Anna, and thank you very much, Miguel, Andrew, and Mira.
Thank you, Nicolas, for having me. And if I could simply say congratulations to our intrepid moderator. Anna, you did a magnificent. Thank you.
No, again, I will highlight congratulations to Instituto Elcano. You know, for us in Spain to be on the podium in think tanks, I mean, maybe it's also because it was when I was in government that we finally put this boat afloat. But it's great. So, Miguel, I have said it, but you are one of the pillars of this fantastic team, and congratulations. Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Andrew. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Miguel.
Keep in touch.
Nicolas, thank you for having me. Bye, Mira.
Bye.
Bye, Nicolás. Bye, Mira.
Bye.
Adiós a todos.
Adiós, muchas gracias.